Hello and welcome to Slate Money, your guide to the business and finance news of the week. But honestly, we're going to do the business and finance news of the past 6 millennia here on this one. This is a really big picture show. I'm Felix Salmon of Axios. I'm here with Emily Peck of Axios.
Hello.
I'm here with Elizabeth Spiers of the New York Times and Slate and places like that.
Hello.
But most excitingly, I'm here with Ed Conway. Ed, welcome.
Hi.
Ed, who are you? Introduce yourself and tell us about this incredible new book that just came out.
Well, I'm just a guy. I'm the economics editor. Actually, I'm economics and data. Now they added a bit to my title. I'm the economics and data editor at Sky News in the UK. I write, columns and things for a few newspapers over here. And I've written a book called Material World. And it's, I guess, oh God, where to begin? It's all about the world we inhabit and told through 6 substances without which we'd all be in big trouble.
At least one of which is literally necessary for human existence, but all of which are necessary for contemporary human existence. We're going to dive into everything from salt taxes to concrete to glass to lithium to copper mines, and how profoundly central all of these things are to our quotidian existence, notwithstanding the fact that we almost never think about them. All of this, it really is an amazing show. You have to listen to this one. It's all coming up on Slate Money.
Right now at Safeway, shop the Big BOGO sale and get all your favorite cleaning essentials. Buy one, get one 50% off. Head into Safeway and shop for select items like Febreze air fresheners, Airwick scented oil refills, Glade 3-wick candles, Mr. Clean antibacterial cleaner, Method all-purpose cleaner, or soft scrub cleanser, and get them buy one, get one 50% off. Offer expires November 28th. Restrictions apply. Visit Safeway.com or head into your local store for full offer details.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.
Okay, so Ed, this book is called Material World, and I have to say it kind of changed the way I thought about the planet that I live on, and it changed the way I thought about the way that I live. About 20 years or so ago, I decided that I was incredibly ethical for living in Manhattan because it was the most sort of energy efficient way to live. And we all get around by walking and taking elevators, which are incredibly energy efficient. And there's high density. And in fact, although everyone thinks that a bucolic life in the exurbs feels closer to the ground and closer to nature, in fact, if you look at carbon footprints, people out there have much higher carbon footprint. So I covered myself in ethical glory. And I said to myself, Felix, you're being very green and ethical. But now, after having read your book, I look around at the built environment around me. I look at the sheer quantity of electronics and telecommunication and concrete and just the stuff that goes into cities. And I'm like, well, none of it is really ruining the planet on an ongoing basis, but all of it came from ruining the planet and digging these massive mines and ruining these lives and poisoning rivers and all the rest of it. And so now I'm kind of rethinking things, and I'm like, is the built environment that has made the modern world actually bad?
It's like it's part of it. So I had exactly the same experience as you. I kind of blithely thought that I just didn't think about this stuff all that much because I don't think we're trained to think about how the stuff that we are using is actually made. And I think increasingly, actually, in a sense, we're kind of discouraged from thinking too hard about it. We just order something and it kind of turns up. And, often it has this sheen that has totally disconnected it with the real world. You have no idea when you're looking at it that it began in a quarry sometimes, or that it got mined somewhere. But it did, like, inevitably, pretty much everything we're touching on a day-to-day basis, if it wasn't grown, if it's not wood or if it's not organic, it was mined. It had to start somewhere in the ground. And I just feel like we've been disconnected with that. And the process of mining and the process of refining and the process of transforming things into the amazing products we're using on a daily basis, generally speaking, it is quite carbon intensive and it's quite energy intensive. I mean, it doesn't mean, we should beat ourselves up about it. I think you shouldn't, go too hard on yourself, Felix. And I think, you're an early pioneer in thinking ethically, it sounds like, and environmentally. So well done, you.
I was one of the first people
Felix
to
invented
think
it.
environmentally. I invented environmentalism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and Al Gore got in on the trick eventually. But I do find, like, starting to think from this prism, like, kind of from the bottom up about, like, okay, when you've got, like, a silicon chip, that has been through this extraordinary journey, even before it got to the fabrication plant in Taiwan where all the transistors were added to it. When you're thinking about all of that, then actually it's not just that the world feels kind of like a more guilty place. It actually feels like a more amazing place, because then you're looking at seemingly kind of boring items, a piece of concrete, and then you start to understand the journey of it.
Can I say, like, because this is the dad joke podcast, so when I see what you did there with the boring items.
Oh, that was not an intention. I came here for I didn't come here for jokes. I came here to I was told this was a really intellectual podcast, so I came here for serious points, and I didn't want it to be undermined by humor. Like there is kind of wonder everywhere, in that kind of, like, I guess, dad way. I've really bored my family a lot over the last 3 years by trying to tell them how amazing, like, concrete is. And, did you know when you see a lump of concrete right now, it is changing imperceptibly in front of us. It's actually sucking carbon dioxide in from the environment. Did you know that? We know that concrete mostly kind of gives off a lot of, cement, it's the glue inside concrete. It gives off a lot of carbon when it's being made. But actually, when concrete is sitting there, supposedly inert in our cities, it is slowly absorbing CO2 from the environment. And it's a living thing. And we forget about this stuff because I just think we've kind of got better things to do with ourselves a lot of the time. But it's just, it is kind of amazing. And so part of what I wanted to do was just, like, part of this book is, like, how the world actually works and the stuff that I wish that I kind of understood about it. But partly it's just like, gosh, when you look at it from that perspective, you understand a lot more about, environmental economy, economics. You understand the circular economy actually means something when you think of it in terms of the material that goes into something to make it, and then what you need to do to recycle it, and then how you reuse it. So I just find it a really clarifying way of understanding, like, the world around us.
I liked it too because, we're on this podcast, we're journalists, we're in the media, we're very in our heads and cerebral. And the book really makes you realize how ridiculous it is to think you can just be a brain floating in the media and online. Like, everything we do, our computers, our phones, depends on the sand that people are, killing themselves to dig out of the ground. Yeah. Dumb old sand is so important. And
not dumb.
Not dumb, sorry. Important. And different kinds of sand also sand. I now know
it's like out of the six like elements you cover in this book, I'd say sand is the smartest.
It's smart, but also, like, you got concrete, which most people
concrete
think is
smart. We had a whole
really
episode on concrete as well, and I'm telling
you,
like, Slate Money listeners know that I'm a big concrete fan.
We just discussed Mark Andreessen's manifesto, which is all about how tech should rule the world. And I feel like your book just closes the door on Mark Andreessen, because it's like, these are the real things that run the world, sand, the process for making glass, salt, digging things out of the ground and fashioning them into other things that let us pretend we are just floating brains on the internet, when in fact we are not, and our brains would fall down without all this real stuff that people are digging.
The internet's physical. I mean, we forget that, don't we? Like, it's apart from, like, Starlink satellites, the vast majority of the distance that data travels, it's over fiber optics. It is physically within glass. It's strands of glass that are crisscrossing the world that enable us to, to have these conversations and to basically do anything these days. again, I think that's kind of cool. But we kind of train ourselves not to think too much about it. It feels kind of archaic, doesn't it? But like what you get, I hope, from kind of reading the book is so much of what we're doing these days may feel like the newest thing in the world, but actually a lot of the time it's just an echo of what we were doing for years. So like the way we make lithium, like a lot of lithium these days, it's kind of similar to how the Phoenicians used to make salt 2,000-3,000 years ago. It's the same process. It's not like we've kind of moved on that much on that front. And then, of course, there are other places where it's obvious that we've made amazing progress. But I like that. It gives us a rootedness, not just in the physical world, but also with our ancestors, in that they were making tools out of things as well. They were taking rocks out of the ground and turning them into kind of, at the time, amazing things. And we're still doing it today. So I think there's a continuity in the human story that I find quite encouraging.
Is there like a deeply physical sort of contingent nature to our existence? I'm thinking of like science fiction where we run into alien civilizations and they all have technology that is sort of recognizably similar to our technology, and we've all managed to use it to sort of explore the stars. But it seems to me, after reading your book, that the development of human civilization has been entirely contingent on the abundance and accessibility of certain minerals that we have at our disposal. We would be in a completely different space if we didn't have silicon, if we didn't have salt, probably salt's a bit different, we wouldn't even be human. If we didn't have lithium, if we didn't have sand to create concrete, and all of these things are just, they're contingent things that happen to be true about the planet that we found ourselves on, rather than being like some great ingenuity of being human.
Yes, exactly. Yes. We are the products of our environment.
Reading your book, you talk about this as something that was really sort of wonder producing for you. And for me, the recurring plot line was just, we discovered this material, we became dependent on it, and then we realized we were going to run out of it. And maybe everyone was going to starve. And as somebody who's a little bit anxiety prone, every time there was a sort of shift in the narrative there, I got a little anxious. Like, what are we dependent on now?
Yeah, it's happening
This
again.
is definitely a question I had. Like, have we ever in human history run out of something? Has that ever actually been a problem?
I have struggled to come up with an example. Sometimes human ingenuity kind of helps. So one example is like fertilizer. So for a long time, we became really dependent on mineral fertilizer. So it started off being the guano, like old bird droppings that had fossilized, that we found off the islands, the Chinchas Islands, which are just off the Peruvian coast. And we mined the hell out of them, and they were all gone after kind of 20 years or so. And that was a big problem because we needed a lot of nitrogen, both for fertilizer, but also to blow each other up, because we were getting really good at blowing each other up at that kind of time. This is the late 19th century. But then that's where the Haber-Bosch process came in. So these two guys, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch, these German scientist and engineer, they worked out how to kind of extract that nitrogen from the air instead of taking it from rocks. And that was in like 1912 or something like that. It was an amazing leap forward. Possibly, if you were going to look at like human history at the greatest scientific discoveries, possibly that's the most consequential, because that is the reason, for better or for worse, and I put some emphasis on that we now have 8 billion people on the planet, and we can sustain them, and people, are able to have enough food. Half of the people on this planet would be dead without that. So without that process of getting the nitrogen from the air rather than from these rocks, we are all able to survive on this planet. So that is kind of the best example I've been able to come up with. For the most part, though, looking back through history, there have been moments where people said we're going to run out of iron, moments where people said we were going to run out of copper, moments where they said we were going to run out of oil. The interesting thing is, for the most part, we actually don't do the Haber-Bosch thing and flip from one way of getting something to another. For the most part, we don't run out. We just get much better at getting more out of the ground. That happened with copper. So, partly because we've got these crazily enormous trucks that get copper out of the ground, get the ore out of the ground. The scale of copper mining has just gone up leagues, even in our lifetime. The size of these mines has got bigger. Our ability to squeeze ever greater amounts of copper out of ever more kind of unpromising rock. So basically what previously was considered junk rock is now copper ore. Like there's a massive productivity leap. Again, kind of like an unchampioned productivity leap. So that's the thing. We just get better at getting stuff out of the ground over time. We don't tend to run out. So that, I covered that there was that bet, the famous bet in, 1980s between Paul Ehrlich and Julian Simon. Paul Ehrlich was the guy who was saying that he wrote The Population Bomb. He said the world was going to hell in a handcart. He kind of still is, I think. He's still going. And Julian Simon was like saying, no, we'll either substitute or we'll innovate our way out of it. Well, the interesting wrinkle in this is we didn't really substitute. We just got bigger trucks and we got bigger explosions and we got better at kind of squeezing it all out of the ground, which raises its own massive environmental questions. I don't know. Have any of you been to a copper mine? It's crazy. Like they are crazily vast things. But the fact that, I hadn't been to one until I started writing this, but the fact that we don't go to these places kind of allows us not to think about what it takes to extract the things that enable us to be talking right now. They enable podcasts to exist. It enables, almost every dollar of GDP. And that to me, again, is a bit of short-sightedness on the economic profession because we're standing on the foundations and not really thinking at all about those foundations. Not that the foundations are going away, but the more you think about them, the more you understand, what it is we actually need to make the world around us actually work.
Let me ask you about the economics of copper, because they really are fascinating. What you're explaining in terms of the ore is less and less rich in copper, a bit like shale is less and less rich in oil, that kind of thing. And we're still managing to extract these commodities from these raw materials by sheer force of size and scale. And that is the bit where my brain explodes. Like when more and more effort is being put into extracting this stuff, how does it get cheaper?
It's one of the greatest productivity stories that we've never told. That's the answer is there's fewer people that work on mines. The trucks are bigger. They're much more efficient than they ever were before. We've got a bit better at the chemical processing. And by the way, all this stuff, it seems like copper, who cares about copper? Copper's everything. We talk about silicon chips being important. Well, the silicon chip's not going to work without copper. Copper is at the heart of the electrical world, and the electrical world is everything, every part of the economy. So it kind of matters being able to get it out of the ground. And yeah, it is one of the biggest productivity leaps that no one's talked about, that we have managed to just get more and more of this stuff out. And partly I put it down to like a good example of this, a good explanation for it is the trucks that you used to have in mines. I know this is going to sound really basic and, but frankly, some of this stuff matters. The trucks you used to have in mines were able to carry maybe kind of, 10, 20, 30 tons of rock. Now they can carry multiples of that. I don't know if you've seen these trucks. These are the ones which are bigger than a kind of, 4-story building. They are massive. They can carry so many multiples more than they did before, which means you've got one person driving that truck. One person is able to move so much more rock than they were before. The scale of the refineries has got bigger as well. So they've just got bigger crushing things. They can crush more and more rock than you ever could before. So these are mega mines. And they're out of sight, so we don't kind of think about them right all that much. But it is thanks to big trucks. It's thanks to chemical techniques where we kind of grind down rock that China has been able to urbanize, and we didn't run out of copper. The modern story of the late 20th century would not have happened without big trucks in mines.
And every single 6-year-old boy listening to this podcast is like, yeah, big trucks.
I know, and they do. And the 6-year-old boy in me does get kind of excited because, the wheels are bigger than like a double-decker bus of these trucks. They are extraordinary kind of machines. And they've got hundreds of them going up and down the mine. The one that I saw in Chile, it's the deepest hole, man-made hole in the world, the biggest man-made hole in the world. And they've got hundreds of them day and night going up and down the mine, just pulling away copper there. And I think 1 in 12 or 14 of every atom of copper in our world, so that we are using, came out of this hole in Chile, this single hole in Chile. They've been working it for more than 100 years. So Edison was getting his copper from this place, Edison was getting his copper from this place. And the future of the energy transition, which, we talk about lithium a lot, and I've got a chapter on lithium, and I will not have a bad word said about lithium, but it is kind of, there's a lot of hype about lithium. no one's hyping, well, a few people are hyping copper, the people that know, but copper is even more important to everything. Because if you've seen, like, you know, the cables that take the power from those big offshore wind turbines through to the shore, if you cut them alongside and have a look at the cross section, there is a copper wire that's kind of thicker than a baseball bat in the middle of them. Sometimes you have 3 copper wires running all the way, you know, sometimes kind of, you know, hundreds of miles from those wind turbines through to where you are. And so you need crazy amounts of copper if we are going to eliminate carbon emissions. It's just logical. So not enough people are talking about that. So peak copper, people have gone on about for a bit. We'll probably go on about it quite a lot more in the coming years, because it's obvious that we're not getting enough out of the ground. But if you're going to get it out of the ground, you need to dig terrifyingly big holes. And people aren't that keen on having very big holes dug, you know, in their environment. I like to say that. So here in the UK, we've got a very bucolic part of the country called Cornwall. It's delightful, you know, kind of beautiful coves. A lot of people where I live in London have second homes in Cornwall, so they love going down there and they go surfing and all of that stuff. I wouldn't catch me doing that. It's incredibly cold water, but nonetheless. Cornwall, the grades of copper that you find in the ground in Cornwall are actually slightly better than the grades you find in Chile. So if we really wanted to be serious about getting lots of copper out of the ground, we would be blasting massive holes in the ground in Cornwall, you know, this beautiful part of England. But clearly that's not going to happen. And that kind of tells you a little something, doesn't it, about some of the resistance we're likely to face in the coming years as we have to get more of this stuff out of the ground, because people are getting a little bit more reluctant to have it taken out of the ground where they live.
Especially when the ground is owned by the Prince of Wales.
He has a lot of it.
Exactly.
But he's into the environment. So, you know, I gather he may have a copy of my book. So we'll see. We'll see. Who knows?
Who are the people of this economy? Who are the people working to take the stuff out of the mines? You know, when I think about miners, I think about really bad jobs or unionized jobs in the US, I guess. Yeah. I thought about this more because we almost had a national freight rail strike. And that was when I learned about chlorine. Like, it was like, oh, that's how chlorine travels in the United States. And we really need it. And if this strike happens, the water won't be pure in 10 days or something. And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, who are all these people digging this stuff out of the ground?
On that front, there's one place in the UK. So the process that you get chlorine for your drinking water is called the chloralkali process. And you take salt, it's like brine, basically, so salt water, and you put it through electrolyzers and you end up with chlorine. That chloralkali process, I was going on about kind of obscure chemical processes that save the world. Again, no one's ever heard of the chloralkali process, but again, we're all dead without it. And this is happening right now. Somewhere near you, there's a plant that's taking the chlorine. And thanks to that plant, we have drinking water, thanks to salt. Thanks to salt, even today, the Roman god of health was called Salus after salt. Even today, it's still treading that same path again. And by the way, I went to the one place in the UK. There's one place left in the UK doing this. You need one, because if you don't have one, then you haven't got chlorine and you're all dead. And the guy there said, if this place goes down, we're looking at these electrolysis cells and, you know, kind of observing the bubbling chlorine going through and hoping there's no leak. And he says, yeah, if this place goes down, then within 7 days, you're rationing drinking water in this country. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Oh my God.
See, anxiety producing.
It's so much anxiety. Imagine being there. And also, there wasn't that much security. And I'm kind of thinking, why do we not have like armed guards everywhere here? But back to your question, Emily, I mean, like, these are tough jobs. You know, the people working in this kind of material world, so like in mining and engineering and manufacturing, these are, a lot of the time, they're tough jobs, but they are kind of jobs with purpose. And the interesting thing, actually, when you go to a lot of these areas, in the UK, it's the case, certainly in the US, it's kind of the case in the Rust Belt. A lot of people that used to work in steel mills or mining coal, making metals, they really had a sense that they knew what they did before. And I get that. I think having inhabited this world and started to understand about how it makes you feel when you understand how the products that we in our ethereal existence actually kind of how they get made and what they are made of. There's some purpose in that. And it's hard to replace that. And I think that the difficulty is that this has increasingly become automated, whether it's mining, whether it's any of these kind of chemicals plants, you know, even the production of lithium. When you go to these places, they feel weirdly empty. You know, I went to some of the biggest plants making the most metal in the world, and there's barely any people there because it's so automated. And you've got a little preview there of what AI may do to service sector jobs. And as a result, there's fewer and fewer people working in these jobs. You've got lots of areas that are left behind, partly because there are fewer jobs within those existing industries, or partly because the industry's gone to China because it's just cheaper over there and they've got lower energy costs. And also they're using a lot of coal to do it, which is another interesting kind of wrinkle in this story. There's a lot of coal that goes into the products that we're kind of importing back from China. It's troubled. There's a discomfort in our kind of developed economies where we slightly let this thing kind of side of the world go, because there were lots of quite kind of decent paying, purposeful jobs, which have now been replaced with kind of not really sure. And I don't think, in the same way that we didn't have a very good answer when we started getting rid of coal mining and when we started kind of allowing some of our steel manufacture to go to China, we didn't have a very good answer about what to do with all those workers. We don't really have a very good answer about what we're going to do when AI comes along and does the same thing for, kind of legal staff or God forbid, journalists.
Well, I mean, if there's one thing on the planet that is more important than salt, it's probably lawyers. I mean, what would we do without lawyers? But I'm so happy that you brought up the chloralkali process, because it gives me the opportunity to segue seamlessly into your salt chapter, which I want to do a little dive into salt, because salt is the most amazing thing. That's coming up right after this.
Hey listeners, the holiday season is upon us. The Slate shop is the perfect place to take the guesswork out of your gift list. Browse our selection of hand-poured candles, classy cocktail kits, stunning stationery, expertly crafted pasta makers, and everything in between. We even have official merch for the Slate fans in your life. From November 24th to November 27th, that's Black Friday through Cyber Monday, we're offering 30% off all items in the store. Get your gift sets, stocking stuffers, white elephant gifts, and a treat for yourself while you're at it by going to slate.com/shop. That's slate.com/shop. Happy shopping.
Right now at Safeway, shop the Big BOGO sale and get all your favorite cleaning essentials buy one, get one 50% off. Head into Safeway and shop for select items like Febreze air fresheners, Airwick scented oil refills, Glade 3-wick candles, Mr. Clean antibacterial cleaner, Method all-purpose cleaner, or soft scrub cleanser, and get them buy one, get one 50% off. Offer expires November 28th. Restrictions apply. Visit Safeway.com or head into your local store for full offer details.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back upfront when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank, USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
First of all, chloralkali process. You have this wonderful quote in your book from some guy basically saying, if anyone ever talks about the chloralkali process, we're doing this wrong. It's like, and I remember that quote because it reminded me of what we experienced in the summer of 2020 about like global shipping and supply chains. And when the boat got stuck in the Suez Canal and all of that kind of stuff. Like, you only hear about supply chains when they break. And the vast majority of the time, it just happens without anyone noticing. And obviously, shipping is another one of those industries which is incredibly efficient, where everything has just got bigger, where the number of humans working in it is getting smaller. And if it stops, then the whole world just starts breaking apart. But salt is not only one of those substances, which, as you say, we need to create chlorine on these enormous scales in order to purify our water. But even long before the chloralkali process, it was probably the most politically important element in the world. And you kind of make the case, and this fascinates me, you kind of make the case that the entire history of China and the way that it has this like one party rule and has done for the past 4,000 years is basically down to salt.
Do you think I was overreaching there?
I kind of believe it.
It's plausible, isn't it? I think there may have been other people who were making similar points. Actually, Isabel Weber, who wrote a great book about why China didn't experience shock therapy, I think it was, and she talked a little bit about the salt monopoly. That basically China, salt used to be really hard to make, okay, because you needed a lot of energy to, evaporate the water. So for a while, it was kind of seen as a currency. It was actually traded as a currency a lot of the time. And broadly speaking, in those early texts that the Chinese kind of wise people were writing down, some of them were saying, okay, if you can control the salt, then you can control the people. It happened for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You had rulers around the world. Basically, one of the earliest things that they would try to bring under their control is salt manufacture. Because if they could control that, we all need salt to survive. If you can control that, you can control the people. And salt, there were monopolies over salt. Salt was heavily taxed. One of the famous resentments that contributed to the French Revolution was the gabelle, which was a tax on salt in France. One of the reasons that Gandhi chose salt as his symbol of protest when he was doing his marches in India before independence. It was the salt satyagraha, which was at the heart of his movement, and it was because the British were controlling the trade of salt. Even back then in the 1940s, they were basically forcing India not to be able to make its own salt, so it had to import British salt from Cheshire. It seems crazy in hindsight, but so salt is at the heart of it. And China was the earliest kind of originator of that, and they have been getting salt out of the ground there for a long time, a lot of time through brine. And interestingly, again, another strange echo, the kind of percussive drills they used to try and get salt kind of and brine out of the ground back in hundreds, if not thousands of years ago in China, are exactly the same kind of drills that were repurposed by some of the earliest oil pioneers in the US. When they were first starting to work out how to get oil out of the ground, they were like, okay, there's this Chinese kind of model of drilling that we should try and look at. So, but the Chinese, you needed but if you're going to control salt in a country as big as China and as populous as China, you need a massive administration. And so there is a thesis that says that the creation of that administration from early on was partly about the control of the trade of salt and iron as well. Iron was another part of the thing that they tried to control in China. And China's had a salt monopoly all the way through, through every different kind of political, every imperial period, every different ruler, through into the communist era. And it was only disbanded, the salt monopoly, in I think 2014, so less than a decade ago.
And it's still dominated by a state-owned company. I mean, there's still a kind of de facto monopoly. Yeah,
it's still a de facto monopoly, and obviously the things have changed over time. Salt is very prevalent. Okay, it's not hard to get hold of salt now. So I think that there's a big historical story about salt, but the modern kind of story of salt is that these days, again, keep going on about the same thing. We don't think that much about salt. We don't think much about where it comes out of the ground, and and it's really cheap as well. And with salts, you don't see much on the surface of the ground because mostly the way that it's mined these days, I put mined in inverted commas, but we just pump down water underground to where there's salt underneath. So we look for a salt strata, you pump down some water underground, the water comes up and it's brine, so it's got salt in it. It is a form of mining. It's called solution mining, but you're just not sending someone down with a pickaxe to get the stuff out. We do more of that now than we ever have done before. In the UK, we mine more salt now. Even in the UK, massively deindustrialized economy, we mine more salt than we did back in our Victorian heyday when we were sending it off to India and other parts of the world. It's invisible, and that brine is just pumped straight off to chemicals plants. And by the way, the reason that chemicals plants, if you look at a map of where the chemicals plants are in the US, or for that matter in the UK, where are they? They're sitting on top of the salt. They sit on top of the salt deposits because they get the salt and they turn it into chemicals, whether it's chlorine or soda ash. By the way, soda ash, I did want to say, the US is kind of interesting on soda ash. So it's another one of these things that seems to be boring, but I promise you is really interesting. Soda ash, Without soda ash, you can't make like glass. It's used as a flux within glass. Without soda ash, you can't make paper. You can't make the lithium carbonate you need to go into batteries. So you can't make your batteries without soda ash. And soda ash, in most countries around the world, we make it from salt. In the US, it's different because I think you have big mineral soda ash deposits. And I think the US is pretty much the only country in the world. It's like a geological freak. The only country in the world to have natural mineral soda ash under the ground, which could be a big advantage in the future because that's where you get the sodium that goes into sodium ion batteries. So America could actually have a big mineral advantage there. And that goes to something else, which is that the US is really geologically rich as a nation, much more so than China, much more so than China. And we're now going into this era where geology kind of matters a lot more than it did in the past.
I feel like the US has all of the world's, or a lot of the world's most productive and best uranium deposits and mines.
I think that's right. Although most of the world's uranium right now comes from, I think, Kazakhstan.
Oh,
but
wow.
The US just doesn't mine it. The US just leaves it in the ground a lot of the time.
Well, it's a bit like Cornwall.
Like Cornwall. You don't want to, you don't want to mine these lovely regions. And copper, the US has got crazy amounts of copper. It's got quite a lot of iron as well, though most of, that kind of, it's like Minnesota, the Mesabi and stuff. Most of that's been mined out. But China has spent the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years trying to build an iron ore industry and completely failed, and still has to rely, enormously on Australian iron ore to build everything in China, its cities, its product, everything. And so, China is in a really weak position. And that's why China, to some extent, has been going around the world trying to secure all these agreements with, African nations and those elsewhere in Asia where there are minerals, because they are very mineral poor and they are very conscious in a way that we're not. I think they're very conscious within Chinese kind of administration and bureaucracy that this stuff matters. They kind of wrote the material world years ago, and we're just now starting to wise up to this stuff.
I just want to come back to salt for 1 minute because it is so deeply important and fascinating. It is something that not only all humans, but basically all mammals, all animals, I'm not sure, need to survive. Without salt, we won't live long. And obviously, for 99% of the history of the planet, all of the animals on the planet got along quite fine without having salt mines and brine being, turned into salt and all the rest of it. And then civilization comes along and we industrialize this thing, we turn it into a state monopoly, and we realize that because of this biological necessity that we have for salt, we can tax it as much as we like. You can put a, 20,000% tax on salt, basically, and everyone just needs to pay it. And that is very early on, long before something like income taxes. That is where the government gets its power, is by saying, there's one thing you need, and we are going to control that thing, and we are going to set the price of it, and the price of that thing is going to bear no relation to the cost of producing it, and it's just going to fund the administrative state and the government and keep the government in power. And that insight, which I guess started in China and then spread to places like France, it blows my mind.
Yeah. It's about power, isn't it? It's about power. It's about despotism as well. And I think there was a German academic who said that basically places that have salt taxes turn out to be pretty despotic places. Yeah, governments have been doing that forever. I suppose the best analogy these days are maybe taxes like poll taxes or taxes on energy, things that you can't get out of having to use. Governments actually are often quite good at taxing them. And so, energy is often quite heavily, taxed, or it's taxed in the UK quite a lot. And so I think it says a lot about the way that nations try and, exert power and raise money. And it's been done for years and years. It doesn't excuse it. You can actually kind of also, another tax that I get a bit obsessed with is the window tax. We had a tax in the UK. This is slightly different because it's not about an essential thing. But here in England, there was a tax that came along So we were really good at making glass for a period. This is potentially a long story, but I'll do a truncated version of it. We were really good at making glass for quite a long period, like glass lenses, glass windows, lovely glass decanters, very nice glass decanters. And then along comes, I can't remember which war we got ourselves stuck into, but some disastrous war, and we had to raise some money to try and pay off this war. And this was before income tax, I think. So they decided to try and raise money from households and also from the glass industry. So they had the window tax, and basically, however many windows you had in your home, you would face a tax in proportion to that, the window tax. That's why, by the way, there's still, if you look at some old houses in England, a lot of them have bricked up windows. And it's not because it looks nice. I mean, it doesn't look nice. It is because they bricked them up so they didn't have to pay as much tax. It's one of the early tax avoidance schemes. But in the process of doing that, Britain basically killed off its glass industry. And so we didn't have a glass industry. And then Germany built up its glass industry. And then come the beginning of the First World War, we're reliant in England on Germany for 60% of all of our binoculars. And then the war happens and everyone's like, oh, hang on. Actually, binoculars are kind of important now, because without binoculars, you can't really see the enemy. And also without like sniper scopes, you just can't hit anyone. And it's really awkward because the Germans have got all the binoculars and got all the sniper scopes. And if we want any of these things, we'd have to go to them, and we can't really go to them because we're at war. And so there was this disastrous thing called the glass famine, where, troops were being sent off to the trenches in 1914 without any binoculars. And there was a big appeal that was launched. You donate your opera glasses, donate your field glasses, whatever you've got, we'll take it. The king and queen donated 4 pairs each. They were all sent to the troops going off to the trenches, with their opera glasses facing the Germans, because we killed our glass industry. And this all culminated in 1915, the year after the war started, where we actually sent spies to meet with German agents to try to buy binoculars off the Germans to kill them with.
And the Germans said yes.
And the Germans said yes. And the Germans said yes.
That's the craziest thing.
And it's extraordinary because actually they said yes because they wanted our rubber. So we did have rubber because we had a stranglehold on the global rubber supply. But I guess the kind of, the serious point of this is this stuff seems pretty unimportant for a long time and for most of the time. And you can just assume you can just buy it from wherever you want in the world. It's cheap. Who cares about binoculars? Who cares about glass? And then all of a sudden, what seems boring and cheap is not. And those moments happen. Back to your point, Felix, in 2020, when suddenly you have a pandemic or when a ship runs aground in the Suez Canal, or they happen when you've got war. And here we are with 1, 2, who knows how many wars coming our way. And so that's why I think it behooves us to just think about this stuff. It doesn't mean we need to make all of this stuff in our country. It doesn't mean we need to make binoculars again in England or indeed in America. But we should really think about this. We should really think a bit harder about how, not just how stuff is made, and not just because it's kind of amazing, but it is kind of amazing and kind of interesting as well. But there's a security issue here that is going to be really important in the coming years. And that's before we've even got to the energy transition and the fact that everyone around the world is chasing for the same kind of stuff at the same time.
Well, I'm glad we have a podcast with Henry Farrell coming up to talk about all of this, exactly that issue.
He did a good book on this, yeah.
I just wanted to add that the story about the Germans and the English, with the Germans providing the English with the glass that's used to kill them in the war because they needed the rubber.
To kill the English.
To kill the English, and the war goes on. I feel like it's a lesson for what people are talking about now between the US and China and interdependence between those two countries, where it's like, people say we can't go to war because we depend on each other,
but no, we can just do this deal where we'll keep on trading with each other so we can keep on killing each other, because if we can't keep on killing each other, then what even is the point?
Right. So there's people are like, we can't kill each other because we depend on each other. Then it's like exactly like Felix said. Well, we can work it out so we can still kill each other anyway.
And we'll just tax the salt. We'll keep taxing the salt in the meantime.
Well, I was proud to be, I was thinking tax the salt and all that. And I thought, well, I'm an American and salt is very cheap in America. So this must be a symbol of our freedom. And we don't live in a despotic country because I can get a big thing of Morton salt for like $1.
Well, also, just for people who have not yet read the book, you use salt to refer to a lot of different substances. And I think most people would think of salt as just, table salt.
Well, that's sodium chloride, right? So that gives you the sodium
chloride.
and the chlorine right there. Like, you don't need that many other salts for it to be incredibly important. But yes, there are lots of other salts.
You mentioned the connection between salt and gunpowder. So when we're talking about weapons of war.
Yeah, nitrogen salts. I mean, I roved a little bit in the salt world because there's good salts. There's good salts in there, and there's salts that are kind of saltpeter. I mean, technically speaking, back in the day, people would call all of these things salts, and there's also a kind of like chemists would call them all salts. So I was like, fine, I'm taking that as well. I'm taking that for my salt chapter, but it's mostly about table salt. I guess what I was trying to do there is like, I was trying to kind of interweave fertilizers through the book, because fertilizers are just, we're all in big trouble if we don't have fertilizers. I love organic food, big time. However, if you wanted the world to try and, subsist on organic food, well, you'd have to give over every acre of unused land, make it into farming land. You'd have to have incredible numbers of kind of cattle and livestock. Everything would smell of manure because you'd have to be smearing that on the fields all the time. And even then, you still wouldn't have enough food to feed the planet. You still have only enough to feed half the planet. So like, I kept coming back to fertilizers as being, one of the most important things that we have. And the story of like saltpeter and these different things like caliche. So I mentioned like mineral salts that we discovered in South America, and then eventually found a way of recreating. Those are some of the most important kind of foundation stones for human existence. And yet again, I keep going on about it, but we don't. I feel like we need to be banging on it about it a little bit more. A lot of people don't like fossil fuels, and I totally understand why. I mean, we need to be burning a hell of a lot less of it. But right now, we get basically all of the nitrogen fertilizer we have on the planet that we use in order to keep half of the population here alive by burning natural gas. So the process to get that nitrogen out of the air involves taking natural gas and getting hydrogen from natural gas, and then using that hydrogen to bond with the nitrogen, and then it becomes ammonia. Without natural gas turned into fertilizer, we're all dead. Leave aside whether we're burning it for industrial processes or to make our homes warmer. Without natural gas to make into fertilizer, we are dead. There's no humanity. Thoughts like that have left a kind of profound impact on me, because I feel like we don't mention that within the challenges of the energy transition enough. And if you wanted to, we have a fertilizer plant in the UK. It's actually just shut down. So the UK is now completely reliant on America for its fertilizer, which is kind of interesting. And it's the first time that's ever been the case. So we ship it all over from the States because you have shale and we don't. And our gas, it all comes back to gas and energy prices. And so if you wanted to get that fertilizer plant and replace it with a green alternative, so you use green hydrogen that you get from offshore wind, you use the power from that to electrolyze water and you turn that into hydrogen. So it's very doable. But if you wanted just to replicate one quite small fertilizer plant with green energy, you would have to give over the world's biggest offshore wind farm just to replace one small fertilizer plant, because that's how much energy it takes to make the hydrogen that you then are going to use instead of natural gas. And that kind of underlines the point that the transition that we've set ourselves the task of getting to is just really, really big. It's a really big challenge. And I think we kind of understate the scale of it.
You mean it's not just a question of like taking fewer air trips?
Maybe.
Or living in Manhattan, if you're feeling it.
Yeah, like it's true. It's like
every little helps, Felix.
Okay, I'll try. But yeah, no, it's a big gnarly big systemic problem.
No, like aviation. If concrete production creates far, far, far more carbon than aviation. So we can fly less, but in the end, actually, I'll tell you a better example. So blast furnaces. There is quite a small number of blast furnaces around the world. So making steel, I think there's less than 1,000. I can't remember. I totted it up in the book, but it's a small number. They produce far, far, far more carbon, like multiples more carbon than every single flight that we take. Far more. Just a few plants produce far more. And so there are kind of these little things where if you kind of cracked them, then it would sort so much else out. But it helps to start to look at the world from the bottom up rather than the top down, and then you kind of see both the challenge. So I spend a lot of my time, like Elizabeth was saying, I'm terrified lots of the time. I'm anxious. I just worry that we may not be able to do it. I worry that we've set ourselves a task that's far greater than the public are aware of, and I think there might well be a backlash. I think there already is a backlash in the UK, at least. I worry that a combination of kind of not being frank about it and a combination of the scale of the challenge is too much and it's difficult. But by the same token, when you look at what we've managed to achieve over the course of the past century, when we look at what we've achieved with transistors, with semiconductors, with the Haber-Bosch process, with reinventing concrete. We forgot the recipe for cement, for heaven's sake, for like 1,500 years, and then rediscovered it. No one thought we would do it. There's so many times that we have assumed that all of this stuff is too difficult to do, and yet we've done it. And so I kind of vacillate between terror and anxiety and hope. And actually, there is quite a lot of hope out there if you look at our history of the material world, because we're quite good at this stuff, actually.
We have a couple of ads for you, but you want to stick around because after the break, we are going to be talking about car paint.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. How do you know when to seize the moment for growth? When your opportunity arrives, you need to be ready. From expanding into new markets to hiring, business leaders face so many tough decisions.
My name is Ray Fager. I'm Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Kings Hawaiian, as well as Interim CIO. Kings Hawaiian is a family-owned company that began in Hilo, Hawaii in 1950. We make amazing sweet Hawaiian bread, primarily dinner rolls and hamburger buns. Our customers love us, but we're always worried about consistently making the same thing everywhere.
Not long ago, Kings Hawaiian began to grow. They needed to build a plant for a new product.
We have a secret formula. No one knows exactly what goes into our bread except for about 5 people in the entire world. We can't use a co-manufacturer. And because of that, we realized that the software we're using to currently manage our production facilities needed to be upgraded.
And with SAP technology, they knew they were ready.
The cloud technology is the thing that will allow us to control all the manufacturing processes from one place, analyze the dough we're making, and get a super awesome product out the door to the consumer. And it'll be exactly the same no matter where you buy it. We get help from AI with making sure the right people can view the right data sets and the wrong people cannot view certain data sets. That's really important in governing.
Kings Hawaiian seized the moment for growth. Will you? Head to sap.com/be ready to learn more.
Slate Money is sponsored this week by Planet Money. If you cannot get enough of money podcasts, and frankly, who can, you should be listening to Planet Money. It covers labor strikes, climate change, your crappy office printer. The one thing they have in common is money. Economics is everywhere and everything, fueling our lives, even where we least expect it. So if you're a fan of Slate Money and are curious to learn something new and exciting about economics every week, check out the Planet Money podcast from NPR. It's a funny podcast. It tells stories. We're not good at stories at Slate Money, but Planet Money is really good at storytelling. It's funny, it's engrossing, and it will answer some of life's burning questions, like will AI take over our jobs? Is fancy vodka just fancy marketing? And why are Christmas trees so darn expensive? Planet Money is econ for the rest of us, so find stories that can't be found anywhere else and listen now to Planet Money from NPR, wherever you get your podcasts.
Right now at Safeway, save on all your personal care favorites during the Buy 3 Save $3 sale. During the Buy 3 Save $3 sale at Safeway, buy 3 of your favorite personal care items like Dove shampoo, Dove antiperspirant deodorant, Dove men's body wash, Tresemme hairspray, or Axe shower gel and save $3. Offer expires November 28th. Restrictions apply. Visit Safeway.com or head into your local store for full offer details.
We need to do a screeching handbrake turn and have a quick segment on Emily's favorite subject.
Oh.
Which is the Amazon delivery trucks. that are now everywhere to be seen in the United States, and specifically what color they are.
Yeah, so great. So, Ed, I've noticed in my suburban New York community that cars are this weird color now. They're not shiny. It's like this kind of flat color. You know it when you see it. The Amazon trucks are this color, the putty. Yeah, it's someone named it putty colored, and it's everywhere. And it's apparently has to do with the paint has less sparkle in it or something.
Yes.
Glitter.
Everyone,
there's less glitter.
Right.
There's less zinc in this paint.
Yes. And so now everyone's driving these putty colored cars, and we're going to talk about it with you because you get really deep into car painting on your Substack.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
Sure. Yes, of course we do.
Okay, so car paint. No, the car paint is massively important. And
It's this.
I feel a theme in this entire episode. Like, I'm telling you, this is really important.
So you think that car paint is all about color. So obviously that's the bit that we notice. But far more important than that is the fact that car paint, it's protecting the metal and the surfaces of the car from corrosion. That was actually the big thing. Like, do you remember, Henry Ford? It was with the Model T, every color had to be black. You can have any color as long as it's black. That's what he said, wasn't it? Part of the reason for that was he was using certain types of chemicals which would protect the car from rusting and protect it from, all the wooden bits as well. But they were all quite black. And so he couldn't actually make any better colors. He couldn't make it red because it was basically black. It used a bit of kind of like asphalt, the type of paint he was using. So car paint is not just, that's the first thing to note. It's not just about color. There are lots of different trends these days in colors, but it's not just about color. It's also about protection. During that period, so when Henry Ford was fighting it out with GM, so you had Ford and GM fighting it out, and it looked like Ford was going to be completely dominant and GM were nowhere to be seen. The biggest thing that happened for GM was in the 1920s, they discovered this new chemical, basically, that could make car paint and you could dry much quicker. That was the other difficulty is, of all of the processes when you're making a car, the painting bit is kind of the most annoying because all the other stuff, you attach a wheel and then on the car goes down the production line. With paint, you have to paint and let it dry. And then after it's dried, you have to put another coat on. And so Ford had all of these hangers where he had to sit his cars as they dried, and it was terrible and it was ruining his productivity. Well, GM came up with a way of both making car paint that would dry quicker, but also this was the key thing as far as GM was concerned. It's like Alfred Sloan and the beginning of consumption as we know it in America. There were so many different colors. So he had this formula called Duco, which was made of something called pyroxene or something like that, pyroxylin. And it was a type of nitrocellulose, which allowed him to create hundreds of different colors of paint. And the big leap that happened there wasn't just about manufacturing process. It was that GM was suddenly able to offer loads of different colors to people, whereas Henry Ford was all about, it's got to be black. GM were like, it could be any color you want. And conspicuous consumption kind of started with that. Like it started with car paint because all of a sudden you were able to buy a car in lots of different Vogues, you could have fashions in cars. And so I kind of think like we understate both the history and the kind of present excitement, interest in car paint. So I go a little bit down a wormhole on this one. We've got so much better as well. That's the other thing. We have got over the years. People like to talk about how we've got much better at making silicon chips and much better at making, apparently that's the thing, and making batteries much cheaper and wind turbines much cheaper. We've got so much better over the years at making car paint. We make it cheaper and cheaper and better and better. We've become much better at coating cars. The way that you used to make car paint was it used to get sprayed and brushed on. Now the entire car chassis gets dunked into this kind of solution. It's called electrocoating. So it's like there's a positive charge on the car. It's dunked into this solution, and it is literally plated. It's electroplated with a coating. And that's part of the explanation for why. Do you remember cars? Like I remember my parents' cars. They were just rusty and crap, and they wouldn't last long. And secondhand cars were always rubbish, and you'd have to kind of go around the back and look at the wheel arches and be like, I see some rust there. I'm not sure about this one, and all of that. That doesn't happen as much nowadays because of electrocoating the cars. We've just got so much better at kind of coating the cars. Now, this is a really long-winded answer, which has at no point answered your point.
Well, you did. I think.
Yeah,
I think you touched on something when you talked about the conspicuous consumption and the big advantage that GM had over Ford. It strikes me, and this is one of my theories. I want to hear Elizabeth on this one, which is that, if you go back to the time of the French salt monopoly, and you look at the fashions of the time, the men were very flamboyant, sort of peacocks, very colorful. At some point in the 20th century, male flamboyance becomes a thing that kind of dies out in fashion. You don't see a lot of bright colors on men. You don't see a lot of gold waistcoats and that kind of thing. And all of that natural kind of peacocky instinct that men have winds up getting channeled through weird proxies, one of which is the color of their cars. And I feel that the huge trend that we saw for most of the second half of the 20th century, and if you read the great Katie Weaver New York Times piece about glitter, it turns out that the overwhelming majority of glitter in the world is found in car paint. It is that men just like shiny objects, but they can't be seen to like shiny objects. And so they wind up buying glittery cars. That's the one acceptable outlet for wanting to express their love of shiny objects.
Until now,
when suddenly now the cars have to be mud colored.
Mm-hmm. They've lost their sparkle.
And they're kind of hideous, in my opinion.
I like them. I think it's just a fad. It's a fashion. It started with an Audi in 2014. Yeah, it started with an Audi in 2014. And then, people saw the fancy $100,000 car that was painted like that, and they want it for their car. And now you can get your Kia in this putty colored, weird, muddy green that is so striking. And it's everyone in the suburbs now driving these putty colored cars.
Has that made it to the UK, Ed?
Yeah, I've seen them around, and to be honest with you, until we started talking about it now, it didn't occupy much of my brain, and now I'm utterly obsessed. And the fact of the matter is, I actually know some car paint people, who, by the way, when I spoke to them, I was kind of I think car paint tells you so much about the world, and the arc of human progress is the arc of car paint. I was saying to some baffled engineer who was staring at me. I was like, "Did you know about car paint?" And he's like, "Well, we just put them in, we just dunk them in there, and then you got to spray them over there." And I'm like, "No, but did you know?" And so I'll find out. The next big thing. Okay, so you hear it here. Apparently, the next big thing in car paint is totally custom painting on cars. They can print a design on the car like a kind of dot matrix printer. And that's going to be the next thing. But no one told me about the putty craze when I was researching this piece.
I think you've really hit on it, though, because it's GM, they make the paint better, more durable, longer lasting. So you think you don't need to buy a new car all the time, but they also do all these new fun colors. So you do need to buy a new car all the time. And then what we're seeing with the putty colored cars is the same thing. Cars are better made now. They last longer, so you have to give people a reason to buy a new car. So if you're out like I am in my neighborhood, and my car is all shiny and glittery, but everyone else's is putty colored, I'm like, well, I better get a putty colored car.
Just another form of conspicuous consumption.
It's such a trick. It's a trick.
So no, I want to know the famous Meryl Streep monologue in The Devil Wears Prada about the reason why she's wearing that blue sweater, and she's we invented that blue in this room and you don't even know it. I want to know who it was that invented putty, and who is the Anna Wintour of the car paint world, who manages to set this trend and have it trickle down around the world, even unto Amazon delivery trucks.
Some guy who had issues with his own masculinity and said, "No more glitter." That's the.
Okay, on which note, I think we will wrap this up. Ed Conway, thank you so much for coming on. This is such a great show.
Thank you.
everyone go out and buy his book and send us emails, slatemoney@slate.com, and tell Patrick Fort thank you for producing such a great show. And we'll be back with more Slate Money.
Right now at Safeway, save on all your personal care favorites during the Buy 3 Save $3 sale. During the Buy 3 Save $3 sale at Safeway, buy 3 of your favorite personal care items like Dove shampoo, Dove antiperspirant deodorant, Dove men's body wash, Tresemme hairspray, or Axe shower gel and save $3. Offer expires November 28th. Restrictions apply. Visit Safeway.com or head into your local store for full offer details.